Bittersweet, but not bitter. I think that is the quote that perfectly encapsulates A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, the highly anticipated follow-up from Sangu Mandanna to The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, though this is a completely new standalone world that still captures the heart and the humor and the magic of The Very Secret Society, or A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. For the record, that is the proper article, and I am going out on a very short limb in saying that this is highly anticipated because my Feature Friday chat about The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches is, I think, maybe my highest viewed book chat on this channel, which is also bittersweet because it's a fantastic novel and I'm glad so many others found the joy and excitement in it. And also, I had COVID in that video and had not yet realized it, so I didn't look great, but I was so passionate about that book, and so I was so excited to dive into this new world, and I had strategically held on to my copy to start, despite the fact it being part of my 10 before the end, so definitely prioritizing, but I had jury duty on Monday, and so I took it with me because I knew it would be a kind of fast read in terms of me being able to jump in and out of it, but also that it would be cozy and comforting for a day that I didn't know how long it was going to be. And I ended up reading about 100 pages during jury duty and was ultimately dismissed from jury duty. And while we are in a different magical world than The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, we are still in a world with magic and with rules for that magic. This time with one of the most powerful and talented witches of an age, and definitely her age, Sarah Swan, who has been kind of taken under the wing of the most powerful witch in the guild in order to train her. Though there's also clearly some jealousy and elitism at play from this much older figure that Sarah had hopes would become a kind of father figure for her as her parents are off gallivanting the globe, and her closest kind of companion and the person she loves most in the world is her Aunt Jasmine. Which brings us to the conundrum at the start of the book, because this relationship and her position in the guild is not Sarah's most pressing concern at the beginning of this book. Rather, Sarah's concern lies in the garden, where her more recent talking fox companion Clemmy has brought her and implored her not to have too much emotion because she doesn't know how to deal with that. However, her aunt has dropped dead in the garden, and Sarah is left to kind of reckon with this. However, Clemmy assures her that she has a fix because she has a spell that will resurrect Jasmine. The deal, the understanding kind of being that if Clemmy gives Sarah this spell, then Sarah will help return Clemmy to her non-fox form. The spell goes off without a hitch, despite the fact that it costs Sarah significantly more magic than she anticipated, in that the night sky of her magic has gone black. And when Sarah attempts to confide in her best friend from the guild, she is instead betrayed to Albert, her mentor, the most powerful witch of an age, and her best friend's father. And instead of being given guidance and comfort in this pretty traumatic time, Albert sees this as an opportunity to remove his competition because he sees a 15-year-old girl as his competition and decides instead to exile Sarah from the guild, trapping her essentially at this magical inn until we pick back up with her in her 30s. But fret not, because while Sarah has accumulated another lifetime of sadness and has still not regained her magic by the time we pick back up with her, she is also surrounded by a lovable group of eccentric characters, including a knight from the local Renaissance fair and her young cousin who she is helping guide in his magical journey, and is soon reconnected with someone she had kind of brief passing with in her past and is disgruntled to discover is even more handsome than ever, Luke, a surly librarian, because what is a Sangu Mandanna book so far without a surly librarian who has stumbled across the inn with some prodding, gentle or otherwise, from his own mentor in kind of seeking a place for him and his sister Posey, who isn't super accepted by the guild due to her autism, and there not being real accommodation or understanding of that. And both find a much more welcoming home at Sarah's inn at the same time that Sarah may have stumbled across a spell to regain the fullness of her magic. So as is evident, this is prime for a lot of the thematic explorations and tonal stylings that I and so many other readers loved so much from The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, with a new twist to it at the same time that I think pushes even a little deeper and a little further in terms of some of the wider world commentary that it's making as well. But before we dive all the way in, because we've already dove a pretty significant way, hi, my name is Melody, and we talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, including, ideally, every Friday we're digging deeper into a specific title. This is Feature Friday 199. So if you have ideas about how we should celebrate 200, let me know, but I look forward to reaching 200 with you all and to ideally move on to 300. So if any of that sounds of interest to you, because we talk about a lot of other bookish things as well, I would love for you to like and subscribe and hang out a little bit longer. But back to this book, because I think that this helped me kind of distill something a little bit in relation to how I view this and The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, that I really wish I could think of a shorter way to say. Maybe I should just call it Irregular Witches. That might be what we go with. But I described that book as a warm hug. And I also described its humor as cozier, more magical, obviously, Talia Hibbert. And I stand by both of these statements, but more importantly, going back to the warm hug idea, because I feel like when I think of Irregular Witches, that is what I return to again and again. And I was very interested to see if we could kind of recapture the magic of that, and not from a place where I felt I was setting it up for failure, but from a place of I recognize the kind of lightning in a bottle, so to speak, of that book. And I talked before too about this idea of how kind of deceptive something like that book, something like this book are in terms of the difficulty level. I know in the acknowledgments, Mandanna talks about this book having taken her 2 years to write. And I understand that because there is a deceptive simplicity to this. It's hard to imbue something with this much kind of emotional depth that doesn't look super hard on its surface, but there is so much kind of wrapped up in this. And so the hug is a definite part of that. That's kind of emotionally the journey I'm going on as a reader over the course of the book. And there is that comfort to the narrative, whether it be the kind of magical setting, whether it be the humor and banter in the tone that just reads really well. In this particular instance, whether it be the zombie chicken. I was comforted by the zombie chicken. However, in this reading, I feel like I was able to kind of extrapolate on that idea a little bit in my own kind of reckoning with it, in the sense that, to me, this almost feels like an adult novel that captures the magic and the spirit of middle grade. In that, I think that both books, but in particular this book, managed to capture the wonder and charm of middle grade, but for adult audiences, and imbue it with a particularly adult kind of sadness, which is a magic all its own. And I know you may be saying, Melody, I don't want sadness. I have enough of that in my real life. But I think it has this kind of gravitas and this heaviness that I feel like we discover over the years, but is able to turn that and allow us to see the wonder that still exists in the world despite that, kind of contextualizing it. But I think that the tone catches the spirit and the wonder of middle grade, like I said, really expertly, and it just kind of grows it up. And maybe that's also because Sangu Mandana has written a middle grade and is experienced in that world as well. I need to finish it. I started it on audio, but I think I want to go back to it in print. But I think also I return again and again to this idea I got from Kelly Barnhill at a talk, even though I've lost my record of it in its specificity. But she approached the difference between writing for middle grade, which she is fantastic at, and young adult and adult audiences in terms of like the kind of point of view of the world. And for middle grade, it's about discovering the world. And so even though Mandana's books, again, I'm not saying these are middle grade, obviously, but I think that it is about that spirit and wonder of discovery at the heart. And so here we're kind of reframing, and while middle grade is opening up, this is kind of collapsing in a way, but not in a bad way, in a way that kind of refines wants and desires and what we think and value, what we decide is important, especially as there are these explorations of found family that are prominent across these two books, especially here as Luke and Posey are being kind of folded in to this family that Sarah has built. And Sarah feels bereft without her power, this thing that she felt positioned her a certain way within the world. And there's a certain level of having to prove herself in a world that is kind of against her in a lot of ways, both within the magical world and the wider world, in terms of the kind of elitism that is reflected in the magical world, especially in the kind of continuation of a certain number of families that are considered the kind of power holders. And so it's kind of a stand-in for, social stratification and aristocracy. And at the same time, we have this kind of exploration when Sarah goes to the pub with her friends of kind of xenophobia because she is half Indian, and there is a lot of diversity within the family she has created for herself at this inn that attracts people that need it the most and hold it and them in the inn's protection. And the way that the inn represents Sarah's magic in a lot of ways, and her state of mind, and the personification of that space, and how it's quirky in a lot of ways, but also very protective in others, warning Sarah of danger. The fact that Sarah is kind of using all of her remaining power to sustain this place and sustain this spell. And at the same time, we see what she calls ghosts, or also echoes of her previous self. And I loved the imagery of this because this is kind of playing with the mental health aspect for Sarah. There are clear allegories or explorations of mental health and depression for Sarah in particular, and the way that she kind of contends with these past versions of herself, the way they manifest, the way she tries to ignore certain versions of them or herself and doesn't want to recognize them, let alone reckon with them. This reminded me of some imagery in a Laura Weymouth novel years ago that I loved. I love this idea of just like the echoes of a house, like the ghosts of a house being these echoes. And so I thought that was really lovely. And the way that we have this really tender moment between her and Luke when he sits down with an echo of hers that she cannot face and gives that version of her the love and care that she can't give herself. And so while the fact that one of the rooms rains, was it apple blossom tea only on Sundays, may not be specifically symbolic in and of itself, but it might be, and I just haven't unpacked it yet. There is also a larger symbolism at play. And so we've got this quirkiness and coziness kind of imbued with everything at the same time that it is bolstering this real well of emotional depth for all of our characters. It's a lot of characters that have come together and formed this family despite some hurt or the way that the wider world may overlook them or take them for granted. And this is further kind of symbolized within kind of character quirk with one of the lodgers, Nicholas, the knight at the Renaissance Fair, who lives in his armor, basically, has really taken on this persona of a knight, finds comfort in that, and wants to go to battle for Sarah at whatever moment. and this idea of chivalry and what a knight does and what we sacrifice for those we love and what that means. I think, again, it is this fun, just kind of character piece, but I think there's also something to be said, especially in relation to Sarah's overall arc, in relation to her own sacrifice. She's given up or gave up her magic at the beginning of the book. And I think it's notable here, too, in relation to the world, which is cozier, which is lighter in some ways. But again, I think that underlying kind of sadness helps kind of weigh that down in some ways. And there is a clear cost to magic in this world. And I like that the way that magic was kind of embodied. For Sarah, it's a night sky. For Luke, it's a library. For Albert, our kind of poster boy for the patriarchy and a lot of things that are wrong with this world today, more generally and broadly, in terms of power and trying to hold on to power and seeing others as a threat to power and moving through the world with that assumption that you need to crush them. It is lightning, so a destructive force. So being able to see people's kind of inner selves through the way that their magic manifests, I think was a really nice touch while still having this real magical, I'm going to use magic or say magic a lot, clearly, air to it. And I loved the visualization of Sarah, this idea that she is a flightless bird at the beginning of this journey because her magic has gone. But what does that mean? What would regaining her magic mean? And then would it make her beholden to the larger magical community, a community that, despite some allies she may not be aware of, has let her down? And of course, amidst all of this, there is a real tender, beautiful love story between Luke and Sarah that I think is just a beautiful slow burn and kind of unravels how they see each other and who they are at their core and how they are perceived by the wider world, how they view others or think others perceive them, and the kind of insecurities they have or may have around that. Particularly for Luke, this idea that within the guild he has been dubbed the Tin Man because he puts on this real icy exterior. But Sarah sees right through that and also rightfully calls out everyone that gave him that nickname as an insult for not properly understanding the Tin Man and the Wizard of Oz. And at the same time, Sarah has this fear that kind of develops that the others around her when she was at the guild and training at the guild thought that she was just a mini Albert, and he helps her unpack that as well. And so this idea of getting through those insecurities and getting through those walls and seeing the real person underneath and accepting that person, messiness and all, and just the like little small things that these characters would do for each other, the small kindnesses. It returns kind of to the ideas in the very secret society of the regular witches, because clearly I forgot I just decided on a shorter name there. The nice is different than kind of idea. It's not repetitive here or repeated here, but just the kind things they do to look out for one another and the way they're able to sit with each other and also push each other when needed. And there is this kind of slow burn to everything, in particular with Sarah and Luke's relationship, as Luke keeps repeating that he's not staying forever. Him and Posey are going to leave, despite the fact that in the meantime, Theo has replaced Luke as Posey's favorite person. And there's this beautiful scene where they're trying to get to the bottom of one of the clues of the spell. And Posey just keeps repeating a phrase. And Luke and Sarah are like, I'm so sorry, Posey. I don't understand what you're trying to communicate to us. Again, very lovingly. And Theo comes in and immediately sees what Posey is saying and really celebrates her and also communicates that to the adults in a way that's just so organic and just delightful in its full acceptance of all of these characters and how they move and exist in the world. And this book really is about accepting people for who they are and how they move and exist in the world, and building a place that protects that and building a world that protects that. And so we are dealing with a lot of like bigger world, heavier things here. At the same time that we are very isolated in this house, we do push outside the bounds of that and are exploring, like I said, these kind of bigger ideas about power and what we have to do to protect our own peace in whatever way. And there are some revelations in relation to this. There are some twists and turns toward the end of the book that made me really sit with that, because I felt like the cost said something about the world in some ways, in the idea that the world's not fair kind of thing. And it returns to this idea that I was kind of playing with the entire time I was reading this book about the middle grade of it all, and like that joy and wonder, but also tempering that more toward the end and returning to that idea of bittersweet but not bitter, and this idea of how we have to move in the world or can move in the world, and the way that we can foster change, but the ways that we have to protect our community and our peace in that too, and that protection still may cost us, but also that community is what we are fighting for. In a lot of ways, I was really, really impressed with this for its ability to be so distinctly its own story and still recapture so much of the magic that I fell in love with in Irregular Witches, down again to the grumpy librarian, though a different flavor of grumpy librarian, but it kind of just heightens everything despite or in spite of staying within this really contained kind of protective cocoon of this found family dynamic, but exploring the cost of moving outside of that and how we do have to face the world sometimes. But again, it doesn't go beat for beat, it doesn't follow beat for beat, it's not the same magical world. In some ways, it's taking some bigger swings this go around, and I think it's a real testament to Mandanna's skill, how effortless it all feels, and the emotion that can be invoked in these short moments. I think she manages to like span character development and time. She weaves in a B plot romance in a really satisfying way. She shows all of these different dynamics between these different characters and the relationships. She builds relationships for Luke with all of the inhabitants of this inn as well. She builds relationships for Luke with all of the inhabitants at this inn as well. And of course, the inn in and of itself is a character in its own right, at the same time that it is this manifestation and this extension of Sarah and Sarah's magic and Sarah's kind of inner psyche in a lot of ways, and how that is reflected within the house. And so I just really adored this. Again, I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to recapture the same spirit of the book, and I don't think we needed to in some ways, right? It needed to be its own book, and I think it manages this so successfully. It is both its own thing with its own thing to say and its own delights and wonders, and still captures that emotional intention of the first, the emotional heart of the first. It feels like a warm hug, but it feels like a warm hug because you need it, because there is that bittersweet under, but again, it's not letting us become bitter. I probably could keep going on, but I'm trying my best to be a little more succinct in these. I do think, though, that if you want to keep going on about this book, one, let me know your thoughts below, but two, this would be a great book club pick. And if nothing else I've said convinces you to read this book, I want to reiterate the zombie chicken, which is a much better chicken sidekick than the chicken in Moana, though that may be my lingering resentment that the pig wasn't the main sidekick in Moana. But nevertheless, I definitely think that if you have not picked this book up, you should give it a try, and it's the perfect season for it as well. It's kind of set in the beginning of winter in this book, which I also think stylistically and from a literary analysis perspective fits the book so well. So let me know what you think, or if you're looking forward to picking this one up. But as always, thank you so much for hanging out and listening to my thoughts. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Again, if you have ideas about what we should do for Feature Friday 200, if anything, let me know. But as always, most importantly, read something good. And yeah, bye.